Hi. First, I would like to welcome everyone. First, make sure that everyone has their wireless radio tuned into E1. So if you can't hear me right now, your wireless radio should be on E1. E1. All right. We're going to hope that's working. So the title for this track is Ask Industry. Here's our industry panel. And it's on Imaging IT's Transformation to the Cloud. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to have two different tracks of questions. The first set of questions is going to be a technical questions about the cloud, which have been submitted both by the vendor panel as well as some questions that I had myself. The second track is going to be a clinical track, and we're going to discuss some of the clinical benefits of moving applications as well as data to the cloud. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A from the audience. So to get started, one of the things that we did, well, actually, first I'd like to take a step back and thank all of our panel members. Everybody up on the stage not only has spent some time to create the questions and also figure out their answers to the questions, but they're also sponsors for the SIIM annual meeting. And that's a huge deal. So we'd like to thank all of our sponsors to the SIIM annual meeting as well. The way that we're going to do this is as we go through these two different tracks, we're going to have a primary responder and a secondary responder. So the primary responder is going to have about 3 minutes to answer the question. The second responder will have about 2 minutes to answer the question. And then we're just going to have about a minute of Q&A from the panelists. By the way, this is modeled after Sports Center. And I still want to know which one of you Charles Barkley, because I still think he's funny. Okay, on that note, you gentlemen ready? Okay, so let's start the technical track, track one. And the first question is cloud deployment. Cloud deployment has matured over time, and that's quite the understatement. This has led to various models of cloud deployment and a whole list of new terminology. So what I would like to discuss first is define what it means to be cloud-based, address some of the applications, both for applications as well as data storage, and then let's describe the technical differences. And as I was walking around the RSNA show floor last November, here's some of the terms that I saw up on boards at the RSNA meeting in November. I saw on-prem, I saw hybrid cloud deployment, native cloud, and cloud enabled. The first responder is going to be from IBM, Alok Gupta, and the second responder is going to be, oh, you know what? I forgot to change the slides, didn't I? The second responder is from IntelliRed. Is that right? Jonathan. You know what, should we take a minute and go through introductions first? I think so. All right, just start here.
Can you all hear me? Yep. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Tomer Levy. I'm a VP of Engineering for Enterprise Imaging for Change Healthcare. I've been in enterprise imaging basically all my career and recently really focused on transformation to the cloud. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Fred Gustafsson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Sectra. So pleased to be here. Great to see you all.
Hello, everyone. Alok Gupta. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for IBM Watson Health Imaging, responsible for the global business of imaging. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
I am Larry Sitka. I'm Chief Strategy Information Officer for Canon Medical Informatics.
And I'm Jonathan Robinson, Director of Product Management from IntelliRad.
Hi, folks. I'm Bobby Rowe. I'm Director of Solutions Architecture and Cloud Computing with Visage Imaging. Been in the industry for about 25 years.
Okay, we figured out how to move forward the slides without the thing. All right, so I'm going to ask the question one more time. The primary responder is going to be Alok Gupta. The secondary responder is going to be Jonathan. So as I mentioned, I was walking around the RSNA show floor and there's all sorts of terminology and claims about cloud. So this is kind of a discussion about what is cloud and the different cloud models. So the cloud models that I saw listed on all the RSNA panels included on-prem, hybrid cloud deployment, native cloud, and cloud enabled.
Yes, thank you, Terry. And it's a great question to kick off the panel and to set the stage. So as we have seen the evolution of cloud and maturing of the cloud technology, it has gone from disaster recovery to cloud data storage to applications such as packs on the cloud, and now the options that Terry just mentioned, right? All the different terminology that we hear. So I like to think about this journey of cloud in four distinct steps, right? The 4 steps that Terry mentioned. So one being the on-prem, where the customer takes the risk, customer hosts the solution, infrastructure ownership, everything is a customer. That's our predominant solution today. And if you were to take these applications and really cloud enable them, as in lift and shift them to the cloud, and now they are on the VMs or they are containerized, but running on the cloud with the infrastructure provider providing the infrastructure support, application support, and the customer is not taking care of the infrastructure. So that's cloud enabled. But as these applications start to consume cloud more efficiently and intelligently through using cloud microservices, and they become cloud native, that's the most efficient way to utilize cloud, and that would be the cloud native. And the way I think about really in practical aspect, implementing the solutions is really hybrid, since we end up having some on-prem footprint for the solutions because of the business continuity, scalability. And so if you want to have best of both worlds, you will hear the hybrid word. And the hybrid is pretty common because that's where our industry is evolving from on-prem to cloud. Now, in terms of the terminology, yes, it's there. But if you think about if you're in the market looking for cloud solutions, you really are looking for applications, most importantly, how cloud ready they are, how optimized for the cloud they are they using cloud sort of microservices, and in terms of efficiency and implementing the scalability. And if you talk about storage, you want to make sure that similarly the storage is also optimized for the cloud, not just for storing data, but also is implemented in a way that you have image level zipping up of the data, so you can actually index, you can actually look up the images fast in an economical way. So you want to make sure that the vendor's vision and strategy is in line with where you are in your own cloud journey, and the vendor is there going to be in the long run to support your cloud journey and making it more efficient, scalable, and support business continuity and business needs.
You actually have a few seconds left. we're gonna pass it down. Thank you. That was great.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I would generally say that in general, cloud is very cloudy in terms of what we actually mean by different things. So to carry forward a few things you said as well, there's a lot of different models there in terms of what is lift and shift even. So we say, okay, I want to basically host my software in some sort of cloud. That could be a private cloud, so sort of managed environment. Could be more public cloud, but it's really sort of lift and shift where you're basically taking your existing infrastructure and software and shoving it in the cloud and hoping that it is cost effective and it's supportable and maintainable and so on and so forth. Hybrid models, even I would say the most ill-defined, because it can mean so many different things. It can mean on-premise, it can mean in the cloud without any optimizations, but it can also mean on-premise with existing software integrating with a very cloud-native solution. So cloud-native, to me, the definition I use to sort of explain what cloud-native is all about speed and agility. So by that, I mean that your software is independent releasable. You have probably multiple releases per day. The software is usually built from the ground up to leverage as many cloud services as possible, whether they're databases, whether it's file storage, whether it's logging, whether it's monitoring. The list goes on and on of those things. That's going to really be the most optimized for yourselves, but also for the vendor to make sure that they're actually cost optimized and supportable and scalable and so on and so forth. So really it's sort of a conversation with vendors in terms of, so we say cloud, but what do you really mean, and what sort of specific services do you leverage from, whether it's Azure or GCP or AWS, whatever it is. How much are you actually using for your services? And then what is your plan to modernize from there? Is this a brand new solution? Is this an existing solution you're just trying to basically rip apart and modernize? And you can have a lot of very interesting conversations about what's going on there. And also, one thing to know, I think very importantly, is that cloud is hard. And so if someone says it's easy, they have not done cloud, or they have yet to learn some very important lessons, either to their software or to their wallet in terms of how much it costs. So that's my sense.
Thank you. So one thing that I would ask just the panel in general about is data image storage in the cloud versus application and application. We have another question later on application upgrade, but and the differences between just putting just applications or just data or all of the above in the cloud. And I was wondering if anybody would want to comment on that a little bit more.
I wanted to add another point on the previous question, and I agree very much with John. Cloud is not easy, and I'm coming from technology, and I often getting asked about cloud native, hybrid, lift and shift, cloud enabled. I think at the bottom line, it's very simple, and we all know the answer. Think about the time when you moved from managing your home photos, your family photos from that disk you had at home to outsourcing that to be it Google or Apple or whichever photo management software you chose. What did you expect then? It's exactly what you need to expect when you're moving your enterprise imaging solutions to the cloud. You expect security, reliability, you want simplicity, you don't want to deal with upgrades, you don't want to deal with changing the storage or migrating the storage. You want to be able to access the data from anywhere. All those 100% apply to the enterprise imaging world and the transition to the cloud. That needs to be the expectation. And it really comes down to be very simple. And don't go to the Kubernetes and microservices and all those very complicated technology, terminology. Really, it comes down to the very basics of what was your experience when you moved your images or photos from on-prem management to one of the photo management software out there.
That's a great analogy. I have to remember that one, actually. Does anybody want to touch real briefly on applications versus images?
Sure. I think from our perspective, I generally describe from a cost perspective, when you're moving an application into the cloud, certainly something that's managing millions of objects or billions of objects even. You've got three major cost centers that you're going to have to account for. One of them certainly is the compute infrastructure, so actually processing the data upon receipt, preparing it and sending it out. A second one is the database environment to support indexing of all of that information. And then the last one is the storage. And those roughly end up being about a third each. One of the things I think is really critical is make sure that you're working with a solution that offers the ability to use inexpensive storage. We all intuitively, I think, understand, and certainly all of us have experience with, that the compute resources and the database resources are inherently more expensive in the cloud than they are on premise. It's no different than if you are renting a car versus you buy a car. Ultimately, you're paying more for the car that you rent for the same period of time. So I think addressing each of those independently and optimizing each of those for the solution that you're trying to deploy, that's the key, certainly from a cost perspective, and also leads to some answers with regard to the technology to support that.
That's a great response. All great points. Thank you. So we're going to move on to the second question in the technical track. The second question in the technical track has to do with security. So we've all heard horror stories about stolen data and personal identity theft. It's all over the news anytime you turn it on. Moving data from on-prem to the cloud feels scary. And it seems as though we could be opening up systems to additional risk. Additionally, ransomware attacks seem to be ramping up. Please comment on both the risks as well as the benefits of cloud-based security and image storage. The primary responder in this one is going to be Visage Bobby Rowe. The second responder is going to be Sectra Frederick Gustafson.
Glad to. So from a security perspective, one of the things that I think you probably even already intuitively understand this as well, is that all of the different major cloud hosting providers, so AWS, Azure, and GCP, they have enormous teams that are dedicated to security analysis, security preparation, and security response. So simply by deploying a solution, and I'm talking about any solution, something that you have personally, all the way up to the scale of something that has the enterprise risk and exposure of medical data. All of that intuitively and inherently is more secure in a cloud-based environment than what you generally will find even with a very sophisticated customer that has a large enterprise, because that customer generally can't afford to have those dedicated security teams that are running 24/7, that are protecting the physical infrastructure, the logical infrastructure, and of course they've got multiple customers running in the same environment, so they have to have strong segmentation between all of those. So certainly that's one of the things that I would start with is understanding that there is inherently really strong security in any of those cloud environments. The second part of the question is with regard to malicious actors. So malware, ransomware, whatever you want to call it. It could even be a malicious employee actor. So all of those are certainly possibilities that need to be protected about or protected against. One of the things that we have chosen to do, and I'm sure some of you are doing the same thing, is that we're storing our data in S3 storage, object-based storage, and storing that with it immutable. So once it gets written into there, it's kind of like what some of us are old enough to remember the old worm drives, write once, read many. It's that same concept of once it's written, it literally cannot be changed. Our software can't change it. Any of our users from a support perspective can't change the data, and certainly none of the customer users can change the data. That also means that no external actor is able to change that data unless they hack into the infrastructure of the cloud hosting provider. That data is protected. So that's the way we have chosen to do that. I think it may be the only really effective way to do that.
Would you like to follow up?
All right, thank you. No, I appreciate the comment on immutability. I think it's a great way to leverage cloud technology that's sort of available today. When we consider security, though, I think it is, and I think this is where, understanding your responsibility as healthcare systems with responsibility for the data for your patients, I think it's much about control as it is about technology. The question is, do you have control when you move to the cloud? Do you really feel that you trust the vendor that you'll hand your data to? Because ultimately, you will hand over data and you will hand over control. So the question is, do you trust the company that you're looking to work with? And we believe it's much more than just technology. It's about ensuring that you have the ability to leverage the security in the cloud that comes sort of natively with the platforms. But it is equally easy to set up an insecure solution in the cloud today. So if you are, as a company, do not have the people, the process, the skills, and the leadership to run the secure solution, that technology will not necessarily be of benefit to you as a customer. So I think it is very important that we consider the fact that it's not only technology, it's equally much about making sure that you're future-proof, that you build processes and systems, and that the vendor has people that understands these questions to be secure today and in the future, because that boundary is shifting. Because the technology that's secure today, it's not secure tomorrow. And so we at Sectra, we have about more than 100 people focused on security. And so we believe that this is really a sort of really key concern of the future as we're moving to cloud. And so our guidance really in this case is make sure that you have a vendor that you feel that you trust. But it's not enough with trust. You gotta make sure it's your responsibility. So make sure that you know how that vendor manages your data and protects you and that data, not only today, but in the future.
Great.
Yeah, first of all, I agree 100%, Frederick. I mean, you can build a very unsecured solution on top of the tools that GCP, AWS, or Azure give you. It's all about what you do on top of that. And then when it comes to cybersecurity, there are two words you have to remember. And if you take anything about cybersecurity from this talk, take high trust and SOC 2. Those two are the leading standards in switching to the cloud in healthcare cybersecurity. If the solution you're getting or the vendor you're talking to doesn't have the high trust and SOC 2 certifications, don't touch it. This is your way of knowing that exactly what Frederick talked about, that the vendor knows what they're doing, and they're holding your data responsibly and not just building an unsecure solution on top of the cloud infrastructure. So take that, high trust and SOC 2.
Yeah, if I may add to both your points, yeah, it's extremely easy to build a unsecure application as well as unsecure infrastructure. By default, a lot of stuff you have with a lot of cloud vendors is really like you get a default database password for every database you spin up, right? I would say vendors who are not able to speak about infrastructure as code and how they have secured things and how they controlled access rights over different applications in the cloud. Those are very important things that they should be able to speak very easily and eloquently about and have shared some lessons learned about what they've actually learned in that space as well. It does take a lot more effort to really build secure applications that actually rotate credentials properly, secure data, and protect your data. So really, feel free. I'm sure all of us will entertain lots of very deep conversations about how we secure our data.
Yeah, Larry,
I
did
think
you want
it's more along the lines of we as healthcare providers, I've been in this almost 40 years. We're terrible at protecting data. You know, for all the different passwords and logins, they're still the same for the last 30 some years with the Pax-based companies. I think taking the approach of saying, let's move away from this single silo-based application to an enterprise class solution that allows zero trust, and then focusing on zero trust even amongst ourselves. Taking that first step, then I fully agree with the context of moving to S3. S3 is our answer. It makes you cloud enabled. It's a strategy to move towards the cloud, its uniqueness in the cloud. But what I will tell you is that you have to effectively use S3. If as a vendor, we don't do a zero trust approach, and then the users don't know better. They actually don't know better. They kind of get the idea, they understand it. But when the applications themselves are communicating within themselves, right, that's where we're finding proxies occurring. You know, we get 2 phone calls per week of ransomware storage and NFS and SIS. We've gone completely away from any of those open access storages. So encryption at rest, encryption in flight, encryption inside. And now we've found vendors that can assist us in doing that.
Great. All excellent points. And honestly, security that keeps everybody up at night, right? Or one of the many, but that's definitely at the top of the list.
But I just want one more. So fully agree with zero trust and end-to-end encryption is going to say the same thing. But also there are third-party certifications you can look for the vendors, imaging vendors that follow this, right? So really important for not only that all the processes exist, but the vendor has to have really strong security posture in their own how they implement their solutions. I fully agree.
Good, thank you. And I would remind the everyone in the audience, because I have a feeling, I mean, some of the terms up here, if they're new, please keep. I'm hoping people are writing down questions for the Q&A at the end, because there's some really interesting terms and interesting points in that last discussion. However, moving on to the third question in the technical track. Is about managing change. And if security isn't the thing that keeps you up at night, managing change of all these applications probably is. So the question is, moving from an on-prem system management to cloud-based systems may require different knowledge and information for IT managers. There are new issues with latency, performance, user remote access, and many more. How can IT managers prepare themselves for these potential changes? What tools and skills does an IT manager need to move applications to the cloud, and how should transmission and storage costs be analyzed? Will cloud deployment reduce ongoing upgrade and management of internal planning as well as direct costs? Or sometimes they don't reduce it. And finally, what is an incremental deployment, and will it change the application rollout model? The first response is going to be from Tomer Levy from Change, and the second response is going to be from Larry Sitka from Canon.
That was a lot of questions. Do you have the full hour?
It was. So I was thinking that you might want to pick 1 or 2 of those questions.
I get it. Maybe I'll start with the IT personnel. I think many times when we talk about the transformation to the cloud, the IT are perceived to be the victims of that change, right? I mean, part of the story is you won't need as many IT, you'll be able to save on FTE, that's part of your cost saving and all of that. From my experience so far, I actually think there's a great opportunity for IT in the cloud transformation. So instead of today where IT are dealing a lot with break and fix and upgrade and storage changes and moving from this storage technology to the next storage technology and doing over weekend upgrades and all those kind of stuff, IT in the future that is already happening to us will be more focused on professionally managing SLAs with vendors. SLAs that are properly defined and being tracked and reported on, and managing that with whomever the vendor is that they chose for their enterprise imaging or for their EMR and so on. So that's number one. And number two, which I think is more important, that will elevate their role to be, instead of fixing the systems, to focus more on customer adoption and value realization. And I think IT in the future have a great role in making sure that the customer is getting more out of the solution they chose, and focusing how users adopt more of the features and fully leverage what the software can offer them. So overall, I think there's a great future for IT in this transformation. The other thing that we're seeing that IT needs to start develop more skills in terms of managing networks and connectivity to the cloud. If in the past we've seen that IT are focused on, call it managing a data center or efficiently managing a data center, if this is going away to the cloud and a lot of that is now on the vendor, the IT becoming really how can I manage a very reliable line to the cloud, making sure that I have connectivity all the time and in all cases, which is sometimes we're seeing that the customers we work with don't always have, and trying to acquire that knowledge. The other interesting point I wanted to touch is about deployments, which I think is a big part of the revolution to the cloud. And again, I'll go back to the example of moving your images from your home on that RAID array that you purchased at Best Buy or wherever, to managing that in the cloud, Google, Apple, whoever you chose. You don't deal with upgrades anymore, right? They just happen very frequently. When I say frequently, it might be a few times a week. You don't notice that anymore. It's all happening behind the scenes, zero downtime. I mean, you don't see that anymore. Features starting to pop up, new features become available to you at a rate that you can actually consume. Unlike the model today where you get kind of a big bang, 6-month or 12-month worth of development, here you're getting fixes and enhancement in a rate that you can actually consume as a user of the system. And the exciting news about that, other than all the overhead that is going away, is really that customers and users are able to consume innovation much, much faster. Because I think all the companies, all the vendors in the enterprise imaging space over the years improve their processes and they can release solution very quickly. But the challenge is always, how do we get the solution to the customer, right? When can we upgrade the customer? And those processes usually today are very long and painful. With cloud technologies done right, we can accelerate that, and the rate that customers will be able to consume innovation is much, much higher. And I think this is the exciting news in all of that. That means
5 seconds.
Oh, 5 seconds. Okay, I'll leave it at that then.
Perfect. Thank you.
So one thing that I've seen primarily is I think IT can now actually focus on delivering quality care to the patient, which is the reason they're actually there. So what I'm seeing actually occur with the shift to the cloud is they focus less on a lot of the what I'll call dirty work. However, cloud traditionally doesn't come with humans, right? Don't lose track. I think now we shift those individuals across from their centralized IT focus into supporting the context of supporting the patient, right? The patient that's on the table. If you've ever seen how dirty this data is, and what it's all covered up, right? It's covered up within single applications. When you shift to multiple applications, you actually look at data from an enterprise-wide instead of a single silo-based solution. It is really, really dirty. You still need a human being to put that, I'll call it semantical perception of information. This is really Brian, our brain, not Brian. I mean, you think it's funny, but you'd be amazed how frequently that occurs. So data normalization and structure of the information to make it right, make it accurate. The other thing, the biggest benefit that I'm seeing the shift to the cloud is actually AI for optimization. It's additional information. There's nothing magic about AI. But I think being able to allow our IT-based organizations to deploy applications ancillary on top of data that's coming across through the solution, independent of the siloed-based application that they're traditionally working with, that actually will allow AI then to, shall I say, operate without intervention. Because right now, running AI algorithms, you think humans are, they're easy with data, right? They store things, find things, move things. They all go home at night. They take lunch breaks. They maybe do that 3, 4, 5, 10 times an hour. AI, when it's done, it goes back and asks for more. The other point I wanted to make, that we're seeing latency times now, in other words, SLA times that we're being committed to, sub 1 second. So time to first image, you're all familiar with, must be sub 1 second. Those are being contractual commitments that we're starting to see. It's really hard to do that running cloud side. So you have this hybrid context, right, that you were talking about, being able to run inside of it. So with that said, it will allow the IT infrastructure individuals to actually focus on wellness for the patient, which is why we're here. I'm a patient. If you're never a patient, I want your DNA.
We have about 30 seconds if anybody has a follow-up comment.
Well, I think as well that, to your point, the number of applications that will be used as a result of cloud deployment will actually increase quite a bit, right? So we're just it's a shift in where the focus will be, whether it's AI, whether it's analytics, whether it's whatever the case may be. Additional applications will keep on popping up in the cloud. But
I just wanted to add another point that we're seeing, and as we're seeing customers move to cloud en masse, also with large distributed topologies and network, to your point, with network connectivity, still I think we need to realize the fact that networks will not always be there. So one big thing that I think we'll be starting to sort of see, and that I think customers really need to look at, is how do I manage this situation if I go to the cloud, but I have network outage? So what's my plan? What's my disaster recovery situation? How can I still operate and deliver that critical service to my patients? So I think that is one of the things, in addition maybe to what's been mentioned before, that sort of really needs to be considered today.
All good points.
If I could make one real quick one, Terry. Show of hands, how many of you would classify yourself as either IT or PACS administrators? So pretty good percentage of you. So the way I look at going to the cloud is this is an opportunity for you to change your relationship with your customers, the radiologists and other clinical users. When you go to the cloud, you're no longer having to worry about maintaining the infrastructure, maintaining the servers or the storage. Let the cloud provider do that for you. This is an opportunity for you to become more of a subject matter expert on the systems rather than the hardware that supports the systems. And now every time you talk to a radiologist, you're the hero because you're explaining to them how to do this thing that they want to do, but they just don't know how to do yet, instead of the one that they're calling to complain about, the system is down again. So it's an opportunity for you to transform your role into one that's very positive instead of one that can be somewhat frustrating for you to get up and go to work every day.
That's another really good point, because I would tell you personally, some of the most important time I ever spent was going to Freighter Hospital in Milwaukee and spending 6 months just in the clinic and learning and seeing what they go through and watching people run down the hallway. I wish we had another hour to just talk about deployment, because at the RSNA Imaging AI in Practice demonstration this year, we had cloud deployments in Azure, we had cloud deployments in Google, and as well as several company-based cloud deployments. And setup, we had about 8 hours set aside for setup. We walked in, we all looked at each other and went, okay, we can go home now. And that's what we did. It was great. We went out to dinner before set up at RSNA. That was a first. Okay, we're going to move tracks, and we're going to move from the technical track into the clinical benefits track. So we're switching gears a little bit. And I hope that one of the outcomes, especially for all the PACS administrators and IT people in the audience, is that when this is over, that you're able to walk around the show floor and you have a much better idea of what questions to ask to all the vendors. So please make sure and write down questions as we're going. All right, the first question in the clinical track is going to be about the daily clinical workflow. So COVID, everybody has to talk about COVID still in this year. COVID and working remotely has changed everyone and almost every business process. Virtual collaboration was substantially accelerated. Do you see beneficial changes, opportunities to clinical work, especially to clinical workflow, based on cloud deployment? Could you give some specific examples? Do you see beneficial changes to data sharing, perhaps as an anonymized data set? And finally, in case that wasn't enough questions, could cloud-based collaboration and data sharing lead to improved clinical decision-making and patient care? The primary response is going to be from Jonathan from Intelerad, and the secondary response is going to be from Tomer from Change Health.
Well, I think in short, your answer is yes to that. Yeah, I think as a result of whether it's COVID or just the last 3 years and the evolution of cloud in general, has spurred on a lot of interesting new adoption of clinical use cases, whether it's patient portal adoption, that's certainly grown quite a bit across the globe. We've seen a lot of use cases as well related to image sharing, right? That's really grown a lot in terms of, we spoke a bit about connectivity, but larger networks of image sharing between organizations, being able to share not through PACS infrastructure or through VPNs, but through the cloud, really enable sort of sharing of those images globally, which has been fantastic to see as well. We've also seen a lot of, or me personally, seen a lot of growth when it comes to image storage as well, right? So we've seen a lot of organizations struggle with their older historical data. What do I do with it? What sort of disaster recovery setup do I have for that data? And we've also seen a lot of spur related to analytics as well. And on top of all that, which has been a lot of change, also a lot of new activation of AI systems, a lot of our across the globe as well for different use cases, which I think have also spurred on other interesting use cases, right? A lot of other additional incidental findings that we're not expecting necessarily. And so to me, cloud has enabled a lot of that from a deployment perspective, from a scalability perspective, from onboarding all these different use cases. We've seen a lot of these use cases really popping up in big ways in the last several years. And I think, and I hope anyways, that this is sort of only the beginning of where we get with cloud. So what we think, the grand things like radiomics, or whether we get to that sort of that place as well, using, and sort of Larry, you mentioned as well, good data, having good data we can actually use and aggregate, anonymize, and share to other organizations, share to life sciences as well, really to provide sort of ways to have sort of more bespoke patient care based on a larger aggregated data set of patients that are similar, right? To me, cloud allows us to sort of make things that are challenging today or impossible today more achievable. So we think about, if I'm looking at a very challenging patient, are there other patients I've seen recently or others have seen recently that are very similar? How can I see their patient care? What was recommended for them, and how do I compare and contrast? Today, almost impossible, if not impossible. So we've seen a lot more of those use cases that I think will pop up in the next several years as well. And I think from us as vendors, being a product guy, I'm not looking to build a version 2 or 3 or 4, depends how long you've been in the industry, but really building a solution that's going to use data to solve a lot of the problems where we use configurations in the past, or little toggles here and there, really using data to optimize to make sure that we have the best patient flow through organizations and make sure they get the best possible patient care and treatment as necessary. And that obviously involves collaboration between organizations, with life sciences, and so on and so forth. So I think fantastic opportunities there with cloud as we add even more imaging and more data into it as well.
Perfect
Yeah.
timing.
Perfect timing?
Put my hand up,
Wow.
yeah.
Maybe I'll add a couple of more that we've seen. I mean, first of all, obviously with COVID, the whole notion of working remotely accelerated very significantly, and customers were looking for ways to fully leverage that. But very quickly they ran into a bottleneck of they're overloading the networks in places they didn't expect, like VPN connectivity and things of that nature, which created huge bottlenecks and really slowed down the workflows. Cloud, obviously, again, done right, opens the opportunity to connectivity from anywhere without loading the infrastructure of the hospital, which I think is very important. And we're seeing more and more of adoption driven from that vector. And once the data was open and securely can be accessed to, all of a sudden there's a new player that can be part of the game, which is the patient. Up until now, patients would get a copy of the data because really they can't gain access to the data that is within the network of the hospital. And now when the data is in the cloud, patient can be part of the process or an integral part of the process, getting access to the data. And we're seeing higher adoption of solutions that connect through Epic Chart or other patient portals to the data that resides in the cloud. The other interesting part, and I touched on my previous question, is when COVID hit, we immediately kind of changed the R&D focus, and we went and developed some solutions that would solve some of the problems that customer, clinical problems or clinical workflows that customers needed. And we were able to deploy that to 1-2 customers, and we were very proud of that. But honestly, we were not able to make an impact at a large scale because, again, we ran into that wall of customers cannot just do the upgrade because it's too complicated, it takes too long, and especially under COVID when they were constrained with resources already. So we had a great solution, but not too many were able to leverage that. And I think this is the big promise of the cloud, that we'll be able to develop solutions and quickly get them to all of the install base so people can consume it more easily. And when it comes to clinical workflows, I think again the rate in which you can consume the innovation is super critical and a huge advantage for cloud deployments and cloud solutions.
Would anybody, thank you, would anybody like to touch on specifically which roles or which tasks within daily clinical workflow are most applicable to move up to the cloud first, and which ones are perhaps most applicable to not move up to the cloud?
So we're seeing the RADs. So sites are using it as a recruiting tool. You now have the ability to read from home, right? Physicians love it. Overnight, when COVID hit, March of 2020, we got notification 50% of our users, the radiologists, they went home. Now you're competing with their kids, doing at-home learning, et cetera, you had to be able to make that shift. The other thing is what that allowed to happen is the physician base and clinicians moved outbound. We moved away from a human and clinical driven workflow to machine and data. So you now have two new users. You have AI and you have analytics. They're just another viewing solution. They just look at data semantically a bit different. So that has dramatically changed the way we shift. So
one thing that I think was really important and driven by COVID was that we all learned that we really can still work together without being in the same room with each other. We learned how to use all the various online meeting technologies. We accepted those now as the new normal. And as a result of that, things that directly apply to clinical workflows are real-time collaboration with our colleagues. So whether it's a radiologist and the physician that ordered the exam, or all the way out communicating directly to the patient, all of those are things that now, most importantly, I think, are accepted. The technologies to do that have been there for a long time, sometimes 20 or more years, but it's now become acceptable. And now it's a matter of gaining adoption within the medical industry, which tends to be conservative for very good reasons. But I think that's one of the things that COVID has brought about a big change in far more rapidly than probably any of us really expected.
Yeah, the whole adoption thing. And the other thing is just the way people think now, I think, has just changed so much. When the next generation gets here, who survived elementary school and middle school and high school and college through COVID, it's just going to be that much more rapid.
So Terry, just to kind of sum it up, right? So I think with cloud, everything would work better, right? So it's a matter of getting the data up there, right? So we can consolidate, aggregate, and drive the workflows and remove the gaps in the cloud, in the data, right? So I think in general, the challenge is really to get to that migration, get to that step. And I think all clinical workflows should work better.
Great, thank you. So the second question in the clinical benefits track is going to focus on combining artificial intelligence, or AI, which we've kind of touched on a couple of times already because it's hard not to, but we're going to go down that path a little bit deeper. It's combining artificial intelligence and AI with cloud deployment. So here's the question, because there always have to be at least one paragraph long. The term AI is everywhere these days. If you were at any trade show, I suspect, I haven't had a chance to walk through the technical exhibits here, but I can tell you at RSNA, every booth had AI written on it. AI is everywhere, similar to the way the cloud was a decade ago. But AI has all sorts of potential issues which radiology departments have never dealt with before, ranging from AI validation on local data to AI model drift, to model updates, to ascertaining the real effect of AI in clinical practice. How do you see the various cloud deployment models being used for AI, including benefits and caveats? The primary response will be from Larry Sidka from Canon, and the second response will be from Alok Gupta from IBM.
thank you, Terry. We're, again, as we move from what I'll call a human and clinical driven workflow to machine and data, this happened in the financial industry 30 years ago, right? If I remember the first time that I had this thing called a 401k. Yeah, I go that far back when it first started. So inside of that, when I was given this 401k and I shifted from one vendor to another vendor, right? They gave me a 12-inch floppy and gave me paper, transferred it through the Fed. We do that to patients today, right? We do that to patients today. ONC is driving interoperability. I mean, plain and simple. They put it on hold. That will actually cause data normalization in the first AI algorithms to be all about data normalization, auto labeling, etc., to assist AI down the path. Where I struggle a bit on the cloud side with AI is I really believe the only way to run AI is to bring the algorithm to the data. Don't send data to an algorithm. Because what I'm finding in the industry is and this is true of any, even just one AI algorithm, right? An AI algorithm that's self-tuning will drift, right? It has algorithmic drift, and it focuses on the cohort of the individuals that it was baselined upon. Over time, if you're so focused on that cohort, and then you have another individual of different genetic makeup, different race, it will skew. So being able to come back and either grab the same algorithm that's tuned primarily for a specific genetic makeup or a specific race is what I believe will happen to make it actually useful going forward. And I'm speaking as a patient. What I also think is going to occur is that if we don't focus on bringing the algorithms to the data, you're going to get so much data. The storage vendors, and I see a couple here in front, they're going to love you, right? That is not a good use, right, of your dollar, whether it's cloud or whether it's, local. That is just not a good use of your dollar. Focus on being able to, if you can bring those algorithms, now if you have, say, 12 stroke algorithm, this is a real case scenario. A site I work with, they have 12 AI algorithms focused on just stroke. They send it to 12 locations and then they wonder why they chewed up a petabyte. The same concept would happen inside the cloud. So if you can actually bring the algorithm, very specific algorithm, to sit clinically on top of the data, you'll get an outcome very specific to the race and genetic makeup of the individual. So that's item number one. I think you'll also find that the adoption and the ease of use for what I'll say a multi-vendor facet for AI algorithms. There is no one vendor here that writes every single AI algorithm perfectly. You're going to find, you want the best of every algorithm for the specific case. So building a platform inside the cloud that actively allows to be able to share that through Docker Trust or whatever it may be is the answer. So that if I know genetically I am who I am, I can grab that algorithm and run appropriately, get an appropriate result. But I still have the capability now of, I'll say, resetting the algorithm to make sure it hasn't drifted, which most algorithm, platform developers don't even think about, right? They all bring it back in-house or they bring it back to a certain location and then they actively run those algorithms to rebase them. We can't do that. We have to bring the algorithm to the data, not send the data to the algorithm.
Yeah, Larry agreed that finally data and algorithms have to come together. So in terms of, I think AI, really it's an adoption challenge, right? So AI has been around, right, with Memo, CAD, and there's been a very focused pockets of AI applications, but the broad use of AI is still very stunted, right? And largely, I see three things have to be really right there. And one is the workflow has to be integrating AI natively, right? So it has to be consumable, but that's where it finally matters, right? The user experience with AI has to be absolutely right. And to Larry's point, all the multiple vendors that are building different AI algorithms and the same 12 algorithms for neuro AI, somebody has to orchestrate this stuff, right? So you have to look at the data, you have to say what's the right algorithm and orchestrate the algorithm. And that means you're not implementing 12 neuro algorithms, or you could think about cloud as that possibility of bringing data, right, to the algorithms in a way that it's the most efficient way to implement the AI algorithm. So imagine implementing an AI algorithm once in the cloud, and then you are routing data from multiple customers or users, and use that mechanism to quickly and much more quickly orchestrate, decide which one's the right algorithm, aggregate the results, because remember you are getting 12 results back out depending on the organs that are AI algorithms that are applicable for that data. So you need some smart ways to bring that information together, present it in the workflow in a way that it can be consumed easily. So you can see the challenge for AI adoption. Actually, cloud can play a huge role because it can allow for that aggregation, routing, orchestration, and then aggregation of that data back, right, between the on-prem and the cloud implementations of the AI solutions. So overall, you have to bring data to the algorithms. The cloud really plays that role to make IT departments' life easier by not having to implement 12 algorithms every time in all different customers.
Go.
Yeah, no, good points. And I just want to, I think cloud in this case is really a great example where that technology in terms of elasticity, dynamics, ability to scale, to get resources on demand, to automate, to orchestrate. This is where I think some of the real sort of cloud benefits really comes to really the forefront, and we're able to really use those sort of benefits of cloud technology in AI. It's a new technology. I totally agree that it needs to be integrated for the end user seamlessly, but I think that that ultimate sort of capability of cloud really comes to fruition with AI. I think it's a great example.
I'm not sure if I agree with earlier points or disagree, but I think we're also like all things AI lumped into one blob is also not maybe part of the problem too. Because I think there's a lot of different use cases out there in terms of how cloud can enable AI for different use cases, right? So when we think about analytics, whether it's sort of tracking for anomalies or forecasting, that situation is different than more clinical AI purpose. But I think a lot of it is sort of, you mentioned the sort of elasticity of the cloud, definitely a lot of services there related to how to train models and have your training set, your test set, and so on and so forth. And I think as well, it allows a lot of our customers to iterate quickly on their own models. So if they build their own models for specific things, be able to really train the models, get access to the data they need quickly as possible, instead of getting a whole bunch of data to get the sort of pinpoint, I just need these things, allows them to iterate more quickly with the data for those that have the in-house skill to go with it. And for them, obviously, it allows them to deploy their infrastructure in the cloud and connect to, they say, the cloud archive as well. So there's a bunch of different situations there, I think, but it does help where the data is accessed and how we can sort of share infrastructure between ourselves and customers and grant them access to the right data to enable their system.
Your comment about, I wasn't sure if Larry and Luke agreed or disagreed. This is where I would love to have a whiteboard up here. So we think we need more technology next year where we can all have our like pads and we can draw pictures. Otherwise, like a huge whiteboard would be great. We're going to move on to the last question in terms of clinical benefits. And this question is about broadening the discussion, whether it's cloud or otherwise, to enterprise imaging. So here's I believe, the longest question of all of them. Many of the SIIM members have roots in radiology. I suspect if we did another survey that most of the people here would be the radiology or cardiology. But enterprise imaging is becoming more prevalent in many institutions. How do you see cloud deployment affecting the wider diagnostic imaging services? Not all specialties are as complex and expensive as radiology and cardiology, although I could also argue that some are more. But applications may be less sophisticated, but more specialized. So more companies and data silos may be involved. Existing imaging standards, image formats, and APIs may not be sufficient, or vendors may not be aware of them. Can all of the specialties move to the cloud? And what is the key for bringing these other specialties along for data access to the cloud? The primary response is going to be from Frederick from Sectra, and the secondary response is going to be from Bobby from Visage.
So I think I'll paraphrase Jonathan. You got this long question before you said yes. So yeah, I say yes. All applications, and actually we can demo it. So if you want to. So now it's actually I think the case is and the truth is, I believe that we're at a position where we are able as an industry, let's just talking about Sectra, to actually get all imaging disciplines into the cloud. I think we are today already seeing far number of implementations of cloud for radiology, breast imaging. We've been doing that for 7 years. It's nothing new. Cloud native technology. We're seeing ophthalmology. We're seeing movies, surgical movies. Technologies that we've been able to leverage in accomplishing this is DICOM, FHIR, and XDS. And I think with those three components, you can come pretty far in terms of actually managing most data sets. Obviously, there are always these special things, and I'm sure somebody in the audience can come up with, but what about this one? But I think we can manage far beyond 95% of all that data, especially if we start looking at the number of bytes or terabytes or petabytes. So that I think the answer is really yes. Technology is there. And I think another perspective on this, and one of the questions was, how do we make this successful? What is the success factors of getting other ologies and enterprise imaging into cloud? And I think, one of the ways that I start, usually think about this is, would you build your own EMR today if you had the option to go with trying to integrate 20 or 30 different modules? How many here would actually assemble your own EMR or go with Epic or Cerner? Nobody. I wouldn't either. I was working in an EMR company before I joined Sector 12 years ago, and it's a heck of a lot of pain. And so I think one success factor is economy of scale. It's the platform idea, the strategy of the platform, to make sure that you're getting a technology stack and a platform that allows you to drive economies of scale. We talked about security. We talked about SLAs and contracting. Are you looking to do that with 20 or 30 different vendors, or can you actually go for a platform approach where you reduce the amount of such auditing, contracting, integrations with EMRs, and make sure that you build on a platform instead? So I would actually say, yes, it's possible. Platform strategies, I think, are implement sort of, really the strategy to do this. Radiology, breast imaging has been done for many years. Cloud native technologies, we've heard about object storage, etc. Where I think the difference is, and where I think the future lies, and I think, Terry, you're having a presentation about digital pathology. That's where the frontier is, and that's where you put pressure on the vendors. We're managing 5 to 10 gigabyte per study datasets. So that's where I think you start looking at the frontier of enterprise imaging in the cloud.
No disagreement at all with anything that Frederick just said. Certainly, I think from an overall enterprise-wide strategic approach, it makes sense to break it down into two different phases, two different approaches to this. One of which is management of the data, archiving, VNA, whatever you want to call that. I think it's important to be fully compliant with all the different relevant standards, certainly DICOM and FHIR, but also IHE, all full conformance with all of those critical IHE profiles that and actors that require vendors to be able to work interoperably with each other, to be able to keep data in synchronization across multiple platforms, multiple clinical uses of that same data that need to all be representing the same source of data, not various versions of the same data. So I think that's all really critical. At the same time, adding on the specific functionality into the enterprise viewer or clinical viewer or whatever term you want to apply to that functionality, something other than the primary diagnostic user, so that eventually the clinical viewer or enterprise viewer has the equivalent functionality to become the diagnostic viewer for those other specialties, whether they be, as Frederick mentioned, with ophthalmology or pathology or other environments. Cardiology certainly is high up there. But I think all of those are going to come together roughly over the same time period of the next handful of years, and certainly at different paces across all of our different specific product lines and everyone else that's represented here, because we've all got different strategic focus on different areas based on who our customers are, who our prospective customers are, things along those lines. And all of us are obviously focusing on satisfying the specific request of our existing customers first. Yeah.
There's another trend that we need to consider when we talk about enterprise imaging and cloud is not only the list of modalities that we support or could be moved to the cloud, but where images are done. And we're seeing more and more images are done outside the walls of the hospital, right? In imaging centers, ambulatory care. We're seeing mobile ultrasound devices that are becoming very, we can see them all over the place, which means that, images are going to be taken anywhere. And you need a solution that will allow you the connectivity from anywhere securely and to aggregate the data from multiple locations, not just within the walls of the hospital. And, cloud is built exactly for that. And I think we're seeing those two mega trends coming together, imaging leaving the hospital and the adoption of cloud. And there's a huge synergy between them.
Yeah, I was going to comment also. I fully agree. That's actually the shift. So persisting data is really easy to do, right? Data in. It's data perception that's extremely difficult to do. But enterprise doesn't mean just image and image type. It means geography. And it's all about geography now, right? Getting the information to the right location information in the right format. That was actually a debate that we had out in class just a few weeks ago. And when they come out with their category for EI, they will take that into context about geography and how it plays inside of the enterprise.
Am I the dissenting voice? I guess we could, you certainly can move everything to the cloud, right? We could, but I think there's a fine line of how much we should move to the cloud and what should remain sort of on premise, right? And in the end, it all comes down to the best user experience for the clinicians or radiologists or whoever it is actually looking at the images and what makes sense in that environment. So instead of just building a Me Too thing where I just shove your stuff in the cloud, fantastic, look at us. Does it actually make sense for the user to really provide that optimal user experience for different use cases, whether it's a geographic spread across hundreds of thousands of facilities across the globe, or it's within one hospital environment, right? So the problems you're solving are different in those different situations. So I think the answer is, as I usually say for all demos, it depends.
Yeah, just to add, I think the enterprise imaging is today, and the enterprise imaging on cloud is the future. And I think the data coming together on the cloud is an essential prerequisite for all the ologies to put together.
There were about 5 topics in there that I would love to have another hour on each topic. Everything from what does the cloud do in terms of helping us to be able to identify which object it is and how to make sure that object, if it's changed, how do you do change management within the cloud? That alone could be an hour discussion. Some of the discussions about clinical workflow and geography and how we can change clinical workflow, based on the differences in geography. We could have another hour on that one as well. However, we finished both tracks. Thank you very much. Excellent discussions. We do need a whiteboard the next time. But I'd like to open this up to Q&A. I've had about 5 or 6 text messages, possibly more than that, with questions. But before I go to those, I was wondering if there's anyone in the audience. And I was also, here's the microphone. So we have a microphone. And I was wondering if anyone in the audience has any questions for any of the specific speakers. Do you want to be the runner? So don't be shy.
Hi. Hey, so on, can you hear me? Okay. This is fantastic information. Where do I sign, right? That's the first response I get. But my main question for you folks is this. What is the number one barrier for hospitals to get into native cloud enterprise imaging? We talk about other type of imaging, but just like the first stick your toe into the pond. What is the number one barrier for hospitals? And the second question is more of an under over question for all of you. If I was to ask you, 50%, let's use a number of 50%. How long would it take 50% of the United States to go to native cloud? How long would it be in years?
Why don't we start with the second question first? I can't wait to hear this answer.
I think this is like what is it called, the technology first law. You always overestimate how quickly things change, but you underestimate how big that change will be over time. And I think that's probably true in this case as well. It's very hard to say, but if we look at industry in general, I'd say the trend is very clear. If we look at, I'm a developer. I've been developing software since I was 5 years old. And if I look at where the trends are in terms of development and development tools and services, where the whole industry is heading, it is sort of cloud and services in the cloud. So just as a software development platform, it is the future. I don't think anybody will debate that. Now, the question sort of, related to your first question, what's the barrier then? Change is hard. And there is a number of different reasons why change is hard that some of my previous speakers, colleagues here on the panel has responded to. But change is tricky. Like, you've already made investments. It's like, money that you've spent. You have people that feel, I think, with a sense of security, trust. Are we ready to make that step? Do we feel like we're ready to make that decision? I think change is really hard. The technology is great, but I'm expecting we'll be seeing like 5 to 10 years. I think that's a sort of a horizon. Where I think we might be seeing a quicker adoption is like the hybrid. I'm not sure who mentioned that before. but as a vehicle of actually facing some of the security concerns on-prem, I think we'll start to see customers archiving or duplicating data to the cloud in the mutable state, making sure that you're a bit protected against ransomware. And I think that will go quickly.
Luke, do you want to follow up quickly?
I think I was going to say the same thing, that if I were to modify the question a bit to say, is there going to be some form or the other, there would be some cloud consumption, there would absolutely be more than 50% in 5 years, right? Because, so many of our customers have been doing cloud archiving, for example, for years. And so I think it's dipping your toe in the water and then taking the next step a little bit and getting comfortable with that. And I think we are seeing that is happening at a more rapid scale than in the past. So it definitely would be hybrid, definitely.
So we're going to go to a separate. I just want to make sure that we get the people who are virtual to have their opportunity to ask questions as well. Anna, do you have a question from the virtual audience?
Yes. So there's only one so far. When it comes to cloud, how do you get around the latency factor? A lot of applications, specifically legacy healthcare apps, do not like latency, and it's for no one specific.
I can try to take a stab at that, and I agree with the previous comment made here. There can be no compromise in performance when switching to the cloud. It has to be same level of performance and no degradation on the clinical workflows for sure, which leads to the fact that probably you need some kind of a different solution if you build to the cloud. Just taking the same solution that worked on-prem and applying that to the cloud may not be sufficient in some cases, and you need a special solution. It goes down to the fine-tuning of the workflows and deep understanding of what it takes to deliver an image. From streaming the image, from caching the image, or predicting what is the next image the radiologist would need, from finding ways of compressing the data or bringing exact information that is required. I mean, this is exactly what it takes to develop an enterprise imaging solution in the cloud, and it takes the 20 years of experience that each one of us has here to be able to build that. I mean, I don't think it's a small undertaking, but this is where we're focusing in the transition to the cloud. There can be no compromise in performance.
Larry, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, like I said, we actually saw overnight a shift happen when the RADs went home, right? They still want the same SLA, regardless. Sub 1 second. I want an image sub 1 second. I don't want to wait for it. So you're also absolutely correct that now work list is becoming a different work list. No more pick lists, right? There's no need for a pick list anymore. Right, an intelligent work list that allows the RAD to go read, takes away the queue fatigue, takes away the waiting time, right, for anything to load. Most importantly, when they open, they read, they mark final, they close the study, next one should be there automatically. The biggest hurdle, by the way, do nothing. Absolutely do nothing. I see so many organizations do nothing, and I've been in this business since '88. The biggest hurdle we have is non-conformity, right? We have so many different applications with nobody doing conformance testing. I'm simply amazed the chest X-ray still gets read. We started out right in the basement of RSNA with SIIM and with the Mallinckrodt team. They couldn't even talk and communicate together, right? The first time it took a half day. That is so important, and providers need to demand interoperability. If you don't have it, it's not going to matter, right? And why? Because right now, vendors hide this, right? Us included. We hide non-conformity. We keep it inside of our solution, and as long as we have a discussion with ourselves, never a problem. But when you start sharing data across, and specifically with AI, it all changes. And I think it'll be decades before we actually move. I'm still talking about sharing on CDs. That's crazy.
Do you have a quick follow-up, Ali?
Yeah, I do. If I could, I'll piggyback on what Tomer said with regard to these are all dealing specifically with the question about latency. That's one of the things that we all have to deal with. Our applications have to be able to manage latency issues because they exist even if you're on premise, even if you're deployed within the four walls of a single building with the server and the workstation and everything right there local. I think it comes down to the overall technology stack of the vendor, the ability to have that data delivered on demand very, very quickly. and I think this gets back to your question from earlier about one of the biggest barriers. One of the biggest barriers is clinical hesitancy to switch to something that has an uncertainty. So one of the things that we have seen is when we're deployed in the cloud, 11 of our 12 most recent customers have chosen to do cloud. We're actually 3 times faster in the cloud than we are when we're deployed on premise. That takes away that concern from the clinical users seeing those kinds of build-up of support for that system.
That's an excellent point. I've seen cases, especially with remote facilities, that their connectivity to the cloud was better than their connectivity back to the data center, which leads to the point of better performance in the cloud.
Okay, that I haven't seen. I'd like to hear more about that. But and I like the idea of managing the latency. And I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but your applications can't be the same because you have to manage that latency. Otherwise it's going to be untenable. And I would have responded to your biggest barrier being fear, but I think that's a huge issue as well, as the radiologists are afraid that it's not going to work. A lot of my friends have mentioned that. We're going to take one more question and then we will wrap this up.
So I've got a multi-petabyte archive as part of my enterprise imaging, and I've been talking to cloud vendors. And one of the things that comes up in almost all my conversations is we can move all of your archive into the cloud, or all of your archive and all of your compute into the cloud, but we can't do a gradual shift into the cloud. I can't take half your archive. I can't take just your DR, those kind of things. And it seems to be every vendor I've talked to has kind of the same story. Either you can do it all or you can do nothing, basically, and we'll wait. My question is, why is that? And how do we get around that?
So I'll start with that, because I think the answer is we can. And I think it's ultimately not really a hard technical issue to sort of solve. The question is really just that we reference data sitting in different places. So as an application, to be aware, the data may be placed and we're sort of sat in different situations, might be a VNA or like an object storage in the cloud where actually sit on-prem on a file system. We're perfectly fine doing that. So I'd say it's not hard, but you just need to do it.
Jonathan?
I'm surprised that you would have received a response from any of us on this panel. I think we would all say, yes, we can. So come talk to us afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So make sure that goes into an RFP
I think
in writing.
It's feasible technically. I don't think it's a technical issue. I think it comes down to performance and cost. Because remember, it went to the point of bringing the algorithm to the data, not the other way around. It's similar to that, right? If for every image, let's say your application is deployed in the cloud, and if for every image you need to go back on-prem, pull it back to the cloud, render it, and then send it back rendering to the on-prem, that's a cycle that takes time and would hit performance. And there's also cost implications. Taking data out of the cloud costs money, and if you price it properly or you want to be price competitive, it will create challenges if your data is scattered all around. So I think this is part of the reasons that some of the vendors are not saying it's not technically possible, but there are challenges to that.
Luke, do you want to respond?
I just need to, I think there is a tiering question here, especially sort of hooking into pathology, for example, where I think it really makes sense to keep sort of, if you're in an on-prem environment, keep your files on-prem initially, potentially, but actually archive the really sort of, data that you're not going to review. So I think it's really a question about tiering. Data that you're not going to review quickly again, put it in the cloud, put it on the cold tier. I think that's a great way.
Yeah, I think agree that it's really more architecting the solution that meets your needs, right, from long-term archive to what your immediate needs are. So yes, so technical solution is possible, but then we will talk with respect to what you want to achieve.
I think on that note, I think that we're going to wrap it up because we are at time. I would like to thank our sponsors, Intelerad, Change Health, Canon Health, IBM, Watson, Sectra, and Visage. One more time, I would like to thank our panel. You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. You made it very interesting. And your CME and CE credit code is up here on the screen. And I suspect that these gentlemen will be able to stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any additional questions. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending. We really appreciate your time.